Oi, and welcome to another episode. Today we're talking about mechanics. Really not many mechanics questions today, so the episode might be a little bit shorter. I keep opening up every daily by saying it's going to be a bit shorter, and then I end up rambling anyway. I suppose that's good. But anyway, yeah, we're going to be talking about mechanics today. First of all, the footage in the background, it comes from Dunlop Gaming, who's got plenty and plenty and plenty of stuff. I've chosen some Norn actually attacking the Svarnir Dome, which is very, very cool. I actually managed to play this myself in the beta, and it was a hell of a lot of fun, and I haven't seen many videos of it. So yeah, there's going to be that in the background. You can find a link in the description if you want to check out their other stuff, of which they seem to have a fair bit. We might even have the same people tomorrow as well. But anyway, yeah, before we really start with the questions, one thing somebody mentioned was Doofy Roofy said about future mechanic type episodes. I was wondering if you could go through the patch notes ArenaNet releases, if there's anything significant. I just wanted to confirm that that is kind of my plan when the game is live. A lot of other people ask me if I'm going to keep doing Guild Wars 2 daily when Guild Wars 2 actually comes out. Yes, I am. It's going to keep going from now until I'm bored of the game, basically, which could be a very long time. And really, daily, I think for a while, we'll probably look at patch notes, things that have been changed in the game, changes that are going to be coming up, stuff looking towards future expansions, and whatever else I can, really, to make it interesting while the game's actually still out. And yeah, really, that's what the mechanic stuff's going to be focused on. I know that you're probably asking this because I saw it too on Reddit. There actually was a leak lately of loads of patch notes from the previous beta. Someone had leaked, and there was a huge list of them. I'm not going to talk about that when we're actually out in the game. Then we'll start looking at patch notes. I might mention notable things that have changed in the beta, like say something like, for example, the problems we had with partying up with our friends and stuff. If stuff like that's fixed from one beta to the other, I might mention it. But yeah, patch notes is probably one thing I'll end up going into eventually, but not right now. The first real question was from Freeper for the Win, who said, no standalones, so we won't be able to make Acanthan or Alonian characters, or will there be different expansions, kind of like with Factions, Nightfall, and Eye of the North? I'm doing it again. I'm talking about expansions. I don't mean to do this, but this question caught my eye because I realised some people might not understand the difference between standalone and expansions. And really, ArenaNet have been using this term to define whether you can buy an add-on for the game that you can play without having the original. So, for example, in Guild Wars 1's case, the game came out. Guild Wars 1 came out. Guild Wars 1 Prophecies. Actually, Prophecies was tacked on later, but Guild Wars Prophecies was out. That was a product you could buy and you could play through. Then they released essentially an expansion to the game, in that it expanded where you could go in the game. It was an expansion in one way, but it was standalone. They released Factions, which, while expanding the in-game world, could also be bought and played completely individually and separately from the initial product that was released. ArenaNet were calling these standalone titles that they released, then they went another standalone with Nightfall. Their original business model was essentially that they thought, because they're standalones, we can tap into this audience of players that aren't already invested in the franchise, and we can just continue to grow. As we release more stuff, more people are going to find out about it, more people are going to stay with it, and it will just be awesome. We'll keep going. In the end, that failed for various reasons. In particular, each new standalone that was being released actually had the sum of all the previous mechanics that had been introduced into the Guild Wars franchise before that, plus more, and it put people off of the new standalones. Really, it got to a point where only people that had played the previous games were buying the new titles as they came out anyway, which is why, really, I guess for one reason, when they capped off Guild Wars 1, they didn't do a standalone. They actually made an expansion, Eye of the North, and this was what they were calling an expansion because this in particular, you couldn't play Eye of the North without at least owning Prophecies, Factions, or Nightfall already, and that's kind of the distinction there. So standalones was really a big part of Guild Wars 1's business model and a big part of what Guild Wars 1 was all about. So some people were assuming, and still do assume, I see it quite often, that with Guild Wars 2, when they expand the game world, they're going to do more standalone product for it, but that's not the case. Really, one of the main reasons they've gone to Guild Wars 2 is so that they don't fall into that trap again. It's almost 100% given that any upgrades and stuff that they'll be releasing for Guild Wars 2 are going to be flat out expansions and not that same standalone business model. Now they're supplementing, and they've changed their business model quite significantly. Now microtransactions play into it far more, and they have changed things up, so don't expect standalone campaigns to come out. However, what you say here with your question about, oh, does this mean I won't be able to create characters in those other expansions? That's not true either. Actually, you can still create new characters when they release expansions. Just because it's not standalone doesn't mean you can't create new characters. Look at most other MMOs. If you buy the expansion, it will allow you to create maybe a new class or a new race usually. And that'll be the same in Guild Wars 2. We'll have an expansion that takes us to fight another Elder Dragon or something, and we'll probably at some point have an expansion that allows us to start playing as the Tengu and opens up that area. But that's not a standalone product. That's going to be an expansion that lets us create a new character. So your specific example, oh, does this mean I can't play a Canthan or an Elonian character? In theory, there could be a chance to then create a human that is of one of these lineages. It's actually quite funny. One of the earlier things that you could choose in Guild Wars 1 that they were talking about with your biography was where exactly you came from as a human. What exactly was your lineage? You could choose Orion or anything like this. That's actually changed now, and that's not a choice. So it used to be that you could say, oh, I am an Elonian, oh, I'm a Canthan, oh, I'm an Orion. And I think maybe it might have even been ArenaNet's plans a really long time ago to have that question would change where your home district is. That obviously wasn't feasible though, and that's actually now not there. So there is still scope or reason for them possibly to allow you to create a Canthan, say, that grows up in Cantha when that expansion comes out. I can't see them really doing that though. I think that would just add needless early game errors, though the game does sidekick you down, so maybe that's not going to be a big deal. But it is certainly a possibility if you really want to be able to do that. That's the distinction though. I really picked this question because I want to make that distinction clear for some people between expansions and standalones. It just depends whether when you buy the product you can play it without owning other products already, I suppose, if that makes any sense. Super short question says, Ice Chomp, have you heard anything more about a dueling feature? Hey, yeah, this is a quick question. No, we've not at all. I was kind of hoping it would just be there in beta. It would be like an exciting little thing, and it would be like, oh, you can duel. I'm a fan of dueling. I think it's cool. I think it's a nice little thing that players can do in the game, and I do question why Arena haven't got it there. I really do. They've said no, though. Their reason for that is because they want to create this feeling of cooperation and community, and a lot of the game is supposed to be encouraging you to play together. So I suppose that's gonna have to be reason enough. That's fair enough. I've actually found they've made it so easy to cooperate with one another that really any real interactions between players is now so minimal. They may as well not be real players anymore. They may as well just be NPCs. That was my feeling during a lot of the beta, and I actually feel that a dueling feature would help go against that and actually introduce more ways for us to interact with one another, which I think Guild Wars 2 is lacking slightly. I'm still a fan of dueling. I still think it should be in the game. If you really care about going 1v1 to maybe settle some kind of a score or something, don't forget there is still the possibility to do that. You just have to go to structured PvP and set up a game type where it's 1v1. But I think a big part of a real fully fledged dueling feature in an MMO is that ability to just be able to challenge anyone that's around. I've talked about this briefly before. You know, some people complain, oh, I don't want to be constantly getting spammed invites to duels. Well, you know, it's very easy for the developers to add a simple checkbox that says automatically decline all duels for people who don't like that. I do think that there's a place for it in the game. I think that their reason for not having it there is kind of loose, and I'm still in the camp that I'd want them to have as many features as possible before rushing some kind of a release. I really am. And if they sat down and said, right, wood and potatoes, you get to decide. We can add dueling, or we can wait another week till the launch of the game. I would tell them to wait another week. Introduce dueling, get it ironed out, get it fixed up, get it sorted out, and then release the game afterwards. I would put the release date off. I really would. I think it's a good feature. It's on my list of things that I'm upset isn't kind of there at the moment. It is sort of there in one way, so you can fall back on that if you want. It's not dueling as you will know it in other MMOs, and no, it is not there, and we haven't heard anything about it, and no developments whatsoever. The last question was from ColorFrog626, who said, do you ever think there will be any racial-specific weapons such as the greatswords, even if it is just aesthetics, as when playing the beta I was a Char warrior and me and my friend who was playing Norm both obtained the same greatsword, and I feel it would be better if the weapon suited to the race more, as it's always pretty ridiculous that the Asura would have the same weapons as the other races of the size. It would be wrong in my opinion. Please, could you give me your thoughts on this? I think, in a way, they have already introduced this feature. Pay attention here, guys. I'm not answering the same question we've answered before. Let's assume it is just aesthetics. There's no way they'd ever do a weapon for different races that gives you different skills or anything like that. They would not do that. They don't want race to have that much of an impact on the gameplay. Race is about where your story begins, the kind of content you experience early on with regards to story that still isn't limited to other players because they can go to those regions of the world, and that is mostly about flavour and the way you look and the way your early game experience is. It's not about the mechanics, and it's not about limiting what you can do at end game because, you know, a Norn gets far better greatsword abilities than Asura. They're just not they're not willing to risk introducing that into the system, and I applaud that. So no, they would never have different skills, but for just aesthetics, they do kind of have this there. You can look at the armors in particular that will be themed for a certain race, and that does mean that you can have certain bits of equipment, and I suppose this will extend to weapons in some situations as well, that is tailored for certain races and will look good on those races. One thing that the main problem is size, and you've raised this in the question. The size of the weapon, for example, a greatsword on a Norn could look very small in the Norn, so let's make the greatsword look quite big so that it looks like a greatsword on the Norn. Now that thing is going to be, you know, 3 times the size of the Asura. It's going to be a massive, massive sword, and it's going to look ridiculous if the Asura is then holding it. So maybe you do have a valid point here by saying, oh, that's ridiculous, they're going to need different weapons, but Guild Wars 2 will scale the size of this equipment down or up depending on the size of the thing holding it. Guild Wars 1 did that as well, and a lot of games do that. So your Asura will have a greatsword that will have the same skin and style, which is perfectly fine, but it will be scaled to an appropriate size. So this problem mainly, because since size is the only issue here really I see, I don't care if my Asura looks like it's wielding a sword that was crafted by the Char or crafted by the Norn. That doesn't matter to me. The only thing would be if it looked unrealistic, and the only thing that's going to cause that would really be size, unless we'd start talking about weird clipping issues, which obviously is a different subject, and I'd like to think that the artists are making sure those wouldn't be there in the first place. So yeah, do take pleasure in knowing that these things will scale for you, and it's not going to look as bad as you might expect. And really the feature you're asking for, if there will ever be these racial specific weapons, maybe there isn't as high demand for it as you might initially expect. Although it is there in some form, in that there are weapon sets that look like they specifically came or are suited to one race or the other, but they won't look ridiculous if you put them on the wrong race, shall we say. It's just a question of flavour and what you like to see. Anyway, there you go, guys. That's Guild Wars 2 Daily 4 mechanics for you today. Thanks very much for watching, and I guess I will see you tomorrow. Have a great weekend. I know I will.